Welcome to the Festival of Legends expansion for Hearthstone. One of the decks that I wanted to play right off the bat was going to be Naga Hunter, and you can see here I've had some pretty reasonable success. Actually made it to sneak into the top 200 here. And pretty decent record so far with the deck. I've only played 7 games, but I was able to go 6-1 with this deck. The one game that I lost, for whatever it's worth to you, I just didn't hit some of the early game minions. So before we actually get into some gameplay with the deck, I did want to talk about my impressions of the deck so far. So this is the version that I was running. And what I found with the deck is that a bunch of bananas is really, really strong. We want to be able to stick our board early and be able to buff it. And there's just so much synergy in the deck with things like Vicious Slither Spear, as well as the Aerosmith, and then of course the Raj. So this card has definitely been good. Thornmantle Musician in this specific version of the deck actually has not been good. I think I still want to play it in the deck just because the 1/3 body on the board on turn 1 can be really good targets for a bunch of bananas, as well as the Doggy Biscuit. The interesting thing is that the Beast getting 1/1 has not been consistent in this deck. And so the one example that I've seen here is summoning the dormant minions off of Spirit Poacher and Wild Spirits. You can see the animation activate, but the minion, after it hatches, for lack of a better word, actually doesn't have the buff. And no word yet if that's a bug or if that's intended, but in this particular version of the deck, potentially not enough beasts to really make use of the finale. But again, it's nice to just have that 1/3 on turn 1 to be a target for additional buffs coming through. Trinket Trackers have been good, just being able to grab some of our 1-mana spells here. And you're also going to notice, taking a closer look at the deck, there's really not very much card draw here either. Aerosmith has been pretty insane in the deck. It's been really good against Paladin, just being able to pick off their 1 health minions. And I think I saw somebody somewhere out in the Hearthstone universe compare this to like a Coldcar Pack Runner from last year's standard set. And it's a pretty apt comparison. 2 mana, 2/3, being able to damage the lowest health enemy. It's also good to be able to sneak in a little bit of extra face damage. So definitely been liking this card. Astalor actually feels like it could be cut. I don't think we would ever want to play anything more than the 2-mana version, so potentially we could be looking at replacing this. Barrel of the Monkeys has been good. Again, we have so many minions that benefit just from spells being cast, and the 1/4 taunts actually help us to be able to protect things like the Slither Spear, Aerosmith, and Raj, or really any other minion that we've been able to buff with the buffs that we have in the deck. So been pretty happy with the Barrel of Monkeys here. Doggy Biscuit, just absolutely core. You can trade it on turn 1 if you absolutely have to, but just, again, being able to buff minions on the board has been really strong. Raj, it's just extra face damage. I think sometimes you can get your opponent to overreact to it, and they just feel like they absolutely have to remove this card. Even though we're not really dealing a lot of damage with the Raj in this particular deck, people tend to get scared of it, maybe again just because it's an early meta and people don't know exactly what we're playing here. But Raj, okay, but not necessarily great, and people tend to maybe give it a little bit too much respect. Wild Seed Package, Spirit Poacher, and Wild Spirits, they're solid cards exactly as you would expect. Happy to have those in the deck. Ancient Krakenbane has been a little bit strange. It should be easy to activate. We play a lot of spells, and we have repeatable spells in the form of Bunch of Bananas as well as Barrel of Monkeys. But it can be a little bit awkward at times. If you top deck this and you have no more spells in your hand to be able to activate it, it can get just a little bit weird. I could potentially even seeing this card be cut. And same note for Naga's Pride. Again, you top deck this, you don't have a Naga in hand to be able to play with it. You're overpaying, I guess, just a little bit for a couple of 2/2s. And to be honest, the 3-mana line is just a little bit awkward. I would almost maybe want to cut this for something like a quick shot, just to get a little bit of extra reach in the deck, to be able to finish off our opponent. And it's also able to be used with the Raj and the Aerosmith just a little bit better. Speaking of the quick shot versus the Naga's Pride, again, just because of the mana cost. So a little bit awkward mana cost, and it's not always guaranteed that you're going to be able to activate this, but keep in mind, you could have some high roll games where you go Slither Spear on 1 and then coin this out on 2. It's going to go a long way to winning the game. So maybe still deserves to be in the deck, but potentially Ancient Krakenbane and Naga's Pride could be cut, and we probably want to experiment with some different cards in those slots. Jungle Jammer has been pretty good. I think the important thing that I've learned about this card, even in just a small number of games, is that it's really just deal 8 damage face over 2 turns. Again, by the time we play this on turn 4 or later, we've depleted our hand of some of these cheaper spells, and so we're not actually going to be able to buff the death rattle of the weapon. Not that big a deal, but just something that I've noticed playing. Posick has been pretty good. Opponents Don't necessarily know how to play against this card just yet. I think every time I've played it, the reaction from my opponent has been to just put a 3/3 out on the board. So of course, if our opponent is going to spend 3 mana on a 3/3 with no text box, then we're going to be really happy about that. And it also makes it pretty likely that we're going to be able to punch our opponent in the face with a big 5/4 body. So Pozic, definitely been very good early. And then I've rounded out the deck with the Queen of Shara here. Queen of Shara has been pretty easy to activate. Again, we just have so many spells and repeatable spells in the deck. Off the top, the card would feel super awkward if we've already spent those spells and don't have a way to be able to activate it. But I've been keeping this card in the mulligan, especially on the coin. It's pretty easy to activate. You can get it down on turn 4 or turn 5. And in my theory crafting video about this deck, I thought that potentially we might want to take the weapon, that it wasn't going to guarantee be that Horn of Ancients to be able to get the 1 mana Colossal. Because again, with all of the cheap and these repeatable spells, I thought we might be able to sneak in some extra damage from that weapon that would be more valuable than just playing a Colossal on the board. What I've actually found is that, again, by the time Queen of Shara comes down, I don't necessarily have a lot of cards in my hand to be able to take advantage of that weapon. And so it's just been default, go with the Colossal every single time. So pretty interesting things that I've been able to find about this deck. It definitely lacks card draw. A lot of times we're playing with a very small hand and sometimes having to play off the top. But it's just absolutely killing all of the other decks that I'm facing, at least in the early part of the meta. And I think that an aggro version of Hunter tends to do well in these early metas. That's something pretty standard that we see, especially in the first set of a new Hearthstone year. So it'll be interesting to see if this deck number 1 can be changed and updated. Maybe find a way to get a little bit more card draw, cut what could potentially be some questionable cards, or as the meta evolves and the decks just get better, if this archetype actually falls by the wayside. But it's definitely been very fun and very powerful here in the early going. And now, let's head out on the ladder and take a look at it. Looks like right off the bat, we've got a Demon Hunter here. I'm actually really excited about this matchup. I haven't been able to face any Demon Hunters with the deck just yet. Again, this is only going to be my 8th game with the deck. But Outcast Demon Hunter is expected, I think, to be one of the strongest cards of the new format, or rather one of the strongest decks. So I'm excited to see how we hold up. I'm going to throw back the Astalor. Again, Thornmantle Musician has been just a little bit awkward in the games that we've played, but I do want to keep it on turn 1. We're also going to get the finale if we can find a way to use it. The question is Bunch of Bananas. I don't know that we would necessarily want to keep this. If this minion dies and we have no target to be able to buff, it's going to be really bad, but if it sticks and we can turn this into a 3/5 on turn 2, it could be really good. I think I'm going to try to keep it here. Ideally, I think we would want to keep the Thornmantle Musician. I would keep Slither Spear. Actually, Dog Biscuit on this would be even better.
They love a little fiddle.
And I think you would definitely also want to keep the Wild Seed stuff, Spirit Poacher, as well as Wild Spirits, and maybe even like Arrowsmiths, some of these earlier Naga. We can see here it is going to be Outcast DH. And I just want to go ahead and buff the minion that I have on the board here, and then we're going face. Please, 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 if you like my channel at all, if you're spending your time here, don't ever trade for this 1/1. You absolutely never ever trade for that 1/1. It's just should never be done. And then you can see here, with the Arrowsmith, we've actually got a pretty interesting turn here. We can play the Arrowsmith and just buff our 3/6, and we have a chance to be able to snipe the 2/1, which could be pretty important. Not quite sure how important it is going to be with this Slither Spear on the board. They do still have the coin, potentially some other spells as far as being able to remove things. But I think the pretty straightforward play here is just get down the Arrowsmith. And then we have the choice, do we want to buff the Arrowsmith itself, or do we want to buff the 3/6 here? I think I'm going to buff the 3/6 into a 4/7, and then we're just going face here. Unfortunately, we hit the 1/1 instead of the 2/1. But again, we don't want to get confused and start trading for minions on the board. We're an aggressive deck. We're going to run out of steam because we don't have the card draw. And unfortunately, you can see here, our opponent has Lady Satheno. This is pretty bad for us if they have a decent number of spells. And also still with the Vicious Slither Spear in hand. So hoping that our Thornmantle Musician will be able to survive. We're going to have to trade for this. That's going to be a high priority minion. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to remove it. And they're still going to have their 2 big Naga here to take advantage of spells. Not totally sure why they would trade with the Slither Spear, to be quite honest. Most likely that's going to be because they have the Halvaria Legendary would be my guess. And so I think we actually just answer this with the Posic. If they kill this, we're going to get 2 3/3s. Then we'll be able to remove Lady Sitheno. And if they don't kill this, then we'll have the trade here. So unfortunately, our opponent, a very, very strong hand here. And again, this is expected to be one of the best decks of the new meta. So don't quite know if this is just a high roll draw from our opponent or if this type of thing is going to be standard here. So this opponent certainly putting us under quite a bit of pressure early, though. And unfortunately, it just kind of feels like we're in a position where we're going to be losing the game every single turn going forward. The Aerosmith is actually a really nice pickup, though, to help us be able to remove some things. So I think it's a pretty easy Aerosmith. We still have 2 bananas left here, or I could just Dog Biscuit. I think I want a Dog Biscuit.
Too quiet.
On the Aerosmith, we can only play 2 spells. Getting this a little bit bigger could help it be able to survive. And if we actually just buff it again, if we hit here, it may have a chance to survive. And you can see we hit the 2-1 this time. So again, you know, it feels like we're just going to be losing this particular game. We're basically out of resources and we don't have card draw with our opponent sitting at 23. Not ready to give up just yet. I assume this means our opponent is going to be taking a trade into the Posic, but we are still going to have the Aerosmith. And unfortunately, our opponent has second copy of security here. And that means that they can actually remove the Aerosmith. So again, it's kind of coming to a point where we're just not going to be able to put threats on the board and just expecting that this deck is going to be superior to what we're trying to do. Although they're low on cards as well. And you can see awkward with the Ancient Krakenbane here. And again, you can see the animation for the buff from the Thornmantle Musician, but when this hatches, it is going to be a 2/4. That's definitely something that I've seen. Just going to go ahead and buff our Spirit Poacher and Hero Power. Likely, I probably should have just played this 3/3 out on the board for the 3/3 body. It's a little bit greedy to try to hold on to it, but if we can hit, say, like Barrel of Monkeys, then potentially we can activate it and be able to get that 5 damage in on our opponent. I don't think this deck has any healing whatsoever, so every point of damage definitely is going to count here in this particular matchup. And again, you can see this deck, it just has ways to be able to create additional resources. It has mana cheat, definitely a very strong deck. And just continuing to cheat out even more mana. And kind of developing a board that's going to look a little bit scary. They're going to draw more cards off of this. And we hit the Naga's Pride here, so unfortunately we're not going to get the Krakenbane activation. We definitely just have to play our cards. So I'm going to go ahead and play the Krakenbane and then play the Naga's Pride just so that we can get the 3/3s. But this game has been a really good illustration of, with Krakenbane coming off the top as well as Naga's Pride, you can see that they're just weaker top decks. And again, we're going to be struggling to get to our opponent's health total here. And our opponent just continuing to be able to cheat out mana and generate resources. And you can see with this particular deck, it's not been the card draw, at least not yet. It's just been the fact that they've been able to generate additional resources. They've played significantly more cards than we have, but they've only drawn 2 more cards. So a lot of resource generation. The Outcast DH, definitely going to be an interesting deck, something I plan on experimenting with myself. And unfortunately, they get I-Beam. That was a created I-Beam. They get the healing, they draw 3 cards, they still have 5 mana. So at this point, I think it's likely going to be best that we actually just concede. We've lost this matchup, and we're going to go next. Next game here against the Shaman. Could be Totem Shaman, could be some type of Overload Shaman. I'm not keeping Queen. I would only keep this if I were on the coin. I don't want Trinket Tracker. Looking for something just a little bit better. The Posic is very interesting here, but I don't think we can afford to keep it because we need early game. I feel like Posic is a very good card in this deck. We want to draw it and be able to play it on turn 4, but we just can't keep it in our opening hand with it being at that 4 mana cost. And again, here with no turn 1 play, I just want to trade this Dog Biscuit. And unfortunately, Vicious Slither Spear actually 1 turn late, which is extremely unfortunate. And it looks like this is actually going to be just an Overload Shaman, which is pretty interesting. And I think here we just want to spend mana. I want to go ahead and play a Naga because I want to be able to activate the Naga's Pride. So I'm going to get down the Raj. Again, our opponent may overreact to this and spend resources that they wouldn't necessarily have to just to be able to remove it from the board, but typically we're not getting a whole lot of damage out of the Raj here. And you can see they are concerned about this particular card. They used the coin, and they used a weapon. And so I think we're just going to get down our 3/3s here. So our opponent overloaded a little bit. They still have 2 kept cards. They're going to be able to cheat some decent mana here. Actually going to be able to cheat quite a bit of mana, I believe. And it looks like they're actually just going to hold to be able to cheat even more mana. So now the question is, do we go for the weapon? If we go for the weapon, we hit them for 10 and they go down to 18. And then we can start buffing the weapon next turn with the spells. Or do we want to go something along the lines of like Slither Spear, Barrel of Monkeys, and then just go ahead and use the Barbed Nets to be able to hit our opponent in the face? It's a pretty interesting call here. If we go the Barrel of Monkeys line, it's going to allow us to potentially be able to protect our 3/3s, and I think I like that play just a little bit better. So this is the play that I want to make, and then I'm just going to go ahead and spend mana and use the Barbed Net's face here. So we're still able to do 8 damage this turn. Hopefully we can protect our minions on the board with the 1/4 being in the way. And then next turn we'll have some options as far as exactly what we want to be able to do here. Maybe we even would just summon 2 more additional 1/4s to try to protect these guys and push that extra damage face. When our opponent swings, I think at this point, their next spell costs 3 less, so it's going to be important to track that. Although with this particular deck, we can't necessarily play around them discounting a spell. We really just want to do as much damage as we possibly can. And they hit a command of Neptulon here, so they're going to be able to clean up 2 of the minions on our board really easily. Good for our opponent and bad for us. And actually, they're going to be able to clear 3 minions in this particular way. So at this point, expecting to just have 1 single 3/3 left. And you can see our opponent is going to have the 2 5/1s. Here we have the Krakenbane. So again, this starts to get pretty interesting. If we play these 2 monkeys, potentially next turn, the Krakenbane can be active. If we hit 7 face, they go to 12. Next turn, we would have an additional 6. We would need 6 more. So potentially the Krakenbane, we're at least 2 turns away from lethal here. And it's probably just more important to equip the weapon and get the damage face here. And then next turn, we'll be able to play potentially 2 Barrel of Monkeys and the Spirit Poacher. And then that's going to allow us to protect our health total a little bit. And it's going to allow us to summon a little bit bigger beast off the Jungle Jammer. Don't necessarily want to tunnel vision on that. I think it's a small thing, but that minion could play an important role. And then just being able to activate the Ancient Krakenbane for the damage is going to be potentially pretty significant here. Unfortunately, our opponent hits some healing, and they're able to maintain their 2 5/1s. And again, we're in kind of an interesting spot here. Because the mana's just not really working out. Although next turn we'll be able to activate this with 2 Barrel of Monkeys. If we play the Wild Spirits this turn, that's going to hit for 5. So we're going to put him to 13. And I think we just want 2 Spirit Poacher and Wild Spirits here. It is going to float a mana, but we have a pretty decent chance of being able to hit at least 1 3/1 Rusher. And you can see we do, so we're going to hit like that. And then I just want to go ahead and attack here. It's going to give us a 2-cost beast, put an additional minion on the board. I think that'll be just fine. And, unfortunately, bad positioning with the Direwolf Alpha here. But next turn, we'll be able to activate the Krakenbane if that's what we feel like we need to do. Plus, the 2 1/4s can potentially be pretty good for us here. We see the Ziliax come down again. That's just more healing, so lots of healing from our opponents here. And also lots of removal in this particular game. Astalor, a premium top deck. I think the play here is pretty obvious. We're going to do that. And then I think, again, we can just go for a Barrel of Monkeys. And then I'm just going to weave in a hero power at this point and pass it back to our opponent. So next turn, we'll be able to activate the Kraken Bane plus hero power. That could be 7 damage from hand next turn. And unfortunately, our opponent hits a rush minion here. And at this point, we kind of have to keep track of how much damage our opponent has on the board as far as what we need to do to be able to survive this game. We are going to be able to get one more taunt off of this, and that's actually just really dangerous. So we have 5, we have 10, we have 12, so we actually don't have lethal. That's crazy. 5, 7, 12. I need to be able to set up lethal is the problem here. So I think we're going to have to take a defensive play, which is going to be Astalor. And then I'm just going to push face with the damage that I have here. So barring additional healing or some type of taunt, we're going to have lethal, but I expect this deck does have healing, the 3 mana card that's going to heal for 8 and put up a 3/3 taunt. I don't think we die this turn, but potentially our opponent can heal out of range to the point that we can't kill them. So next turn we have 3, we have 5, we have 10 from hand. So likely our opponent wants to heal, potentially try to clear our board here. Any healing at all may be enough for our opponent to actually just be able to win this game. Only 10 damage from hand, and likely this is going to be our last turn as well. I don't think we're going to be able to survive an additional turn here. And they are looking for cards. Again, the card I'm worried about is the new 3 mana card. I believe it's 3 mana, heal 8, and summon a 3/3 with taunt. That would put him back to 17. And unless they just wanted to send a lot of damage face and leave us some minions on the board, we likely would not be able to find lethal. And again, I would expect that my opponent is likely going to not be misplaying in that fashion. They do actually hit some healing, go back to 14, and I think we actually just died here. Extremely unfortunate. Our opponent was able to find lethal, so 2 games, 2 losses. Pretty unfortunate. Also pretty rare on my channel, by the way. So, you can see perhaps the meta is already starting to evolve a little bit, but in the early going, again, this deck has been very good for me. I've been enjoying it, and if you have the cards, I encourage you to get out and give it a try. At this point, though, make sure that you do not craft, simply because we don't know what's going to be good, and if you have limited dust, you don't necessarily want to waste your dust. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Uncorrupt, and good luck out on the ladder.